During a family dinner at my son's house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He avoided my eyes, his hands trembled, and every answer sounded rehearsed. I had been suspicious for weeks about his money, his fear, his silence. When dizziness hit, I excused myself for water. But instead, I followed my instincts into his home office. What I saw on that desk stopped my breath. I picked up my phone and called 911. Welcome to Family Revenge Stories. I'm really glad you're here. Before the story unfolds, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and the current temperature in your area. It helps build this community more than you know. And just so you're aware, this story includes fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real names or locations is coincidental, but the message itself is intended to offer insight and reflection. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in late November. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at Owen's photo from his law school graduation, back when he still called me every Sunday, when the phone rang with a number I recognized, but hadn't seen in 6 months. I should have let it go to voicemail. That's what 65 years of life teaches you sometimes. Silence is safer than conversation. But I'd spent 3 years in retirement learning that silence doesn't ease loneliness. It only makes the empty rooms echo louder. Dad. The voice on the other end wasn't Owen's. It was Valerie's, my daughter-in-law, with that sweet precision she used when she wanted something. I know we haven't talked in months, but Owen misses you even if he won't admit it. I think it's time we brought this family back together. I gripped the phone tighter, watching November rain streak down the kitchen window of my Connecticut home. 6 months. That's how long it had been since Owen and I last spoke, a cold silence that started with an argument I still couldn't quite explain. Something about money, about control, about the way Valerie seemed to steer every conversation, every decision, every part of Owen's life that used to include me. He wants me there. I asked, though I already knew the answer. Owen was too proud to reach out first. Always had been, even as a boy. He does, Valerie said smoothly. This Saturday, dinner at our place, 7 o'clock. I'm making that pot roast you taught me. She'd never made pot roast in her life. I'd taught Anne that recipe 30 years ago, back when our kitchen was full of laughter instead of silence. But I didn't correct her. Prosecutors learn to listen for what people don't say as much as what they do. I don't know, Valerie. Maybe it's too soon. Simon. Her voice dropped, losing some of that sugar-coated warmth. Owen is your only son. Anne would have wanted you two to work this out. You know she would. The mention of Anne hit exactly where she intended. My wife had died 6 years ago in 2019, and she'd spent her final months worrying about the growing distance between Owen and me. I'd promised her I'd fix it. I just hadn't figured out how. I looked back at Owen's graduation photo. 24 years old in that picture, grinning in his cap and gown, his arm around my shoulders. That version of my son still existed somewhere beneath the expensive suits and the defensive walls he'd built. Didn't he? Okay, I heard myself say. Saturday, 7 o'clock. Wonderful. The warmth returned to Valerie's voice like someone had flipped a switch. We're so looking forward to it, Simon. It'll be just like old times. But as I hung up and set the phone on the counter, my prosecutor's instinct, the one that never fully retires, whispered a warning I couldn't quite name. Old times. We'd never had old times with Valerie. She and Owen had been married 7 years, and I could count on one hand the number of real conversations we'd had. She was always pleasant, always appropriate. But something about her reminded me of the witnesses I used to prep for trial, people who'd rehearsed their lines so many times they forgot what the truth looked like. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Anne and I used to plan our days, where Owen used to do his homework, where our family used to feel like something solid and real. Now it was just me and the silence and a phone call that felt less like an olive branch and more like an opening move in a game I didn't understand. 4 days. I had 4 days until Saturday. 4 days before I walked into that house and discovered something that would force me to choose between my son's freedom and the truth. I spent those 4 days doing what retired prosecutors do. I couldn't stop myself from investigating. Wednesday morning, I woke before dawn, a habit built over 30 years of court schedules that retirement hadn't managed to break. I told myself I wasn't investigating. I was just observing. The November air bit cold as I walked through my neighborhood, watching the last stubborn leaves cling to the oak trees lining my street. Connecticut autumns had always been Anne's favorite season. She used to say the falling leaves reminded her that endings could be beautiful. I'd never told her that prosecutors don't see endings that way. We see what comes after the cleanup, the consequences, the truth that surfaces when everything else falls away. By 8 o'clock, I was at Roosevelt's Cafe, the place where I'd been drinking my morning coffee for the past 15 years. The owner, a woman named Patricia, who'd stopped asking why I always sat at the corner table facing the door, brought me my usual black coffee, no sugar, without a word. That's where Malcolm Reeves found me on Thursday morning, staring at my phone like it might reveal something I'd missed in Valerie's voice 2 days earlier. "You look troubled, Simon." Malcolm slid into the seat across from me, setting down his own coffee. At 62, he'd been a detective for 25 years before starting his private investigation business. We'd worked dozens of cases together back when I was still prosecuting. Now we just played chess on Wednesday afternoons and pretended we weren't both still looking for patterns in everything around us. "First contact in 6 months," I said, showing him my call history. "My daughter-in-law, dinner invitation for Saturday." Malcolm studied me the way he used to study crime scenes, methodical, patient, missing nothing. "And you don't trust it." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." He took a sip of his coffee. "Trust your instincts, Simon. You taught me that." But that was the problem. My instincts weren't giving me clear answers. They were just whispering warnings I couldn't translate into evidence. Thursday afternoon, I did something I'm not proud of. I drove past Owen's house. I told myself I was just taking a different route to the grocery store, but the truth was simpler and sadder. I wanted to see where my son lived now, what his life looked like without me in it. The address led me to Greenwich, one of those Connecticut neighborhoods where old money meets new ambition. Owen's house sat on a corner lot, a sprawling colonial that would have made Anne gasp. I slowed down just enough to take it in professional landscaping, a new BMW in the circular driveway, and what looked like major renovation work on the back deck. Through my prosecutor's eyes, I saw dollar signs everywhere. That house would cost at least $1.2 million. Easy. I knew what Owen made, or at least what he used to tell me he made. Corporate lawyers at mid-level firms in Connecticut pulled maybe $180 a year. Good money, solid money, but not this kind of money. The mortgage alone would run over $8,000 a month, and that was before property taxes, the cars, the lifestyle that came with an address like this. I drove around the block, twice my mind, doing calculations that felt uncomfortably familiar. This was how I used to work cases, following the money, watching for the gaps between what people claimed and what they spent. But this wasn't a case. This was my son. Friday. I tried to distract myself. I read 3 newspapers cover to cover. I reorganized my home office, all those case files from years ago, evidence of a career that felt further away every day. I pulled out a photo album Anne had kept, found pictures of Owen at 8 years old, grinning gap-toothed at a baseball game, back when he still thought I was a hero, instead of whatever I'd become to him over the past few years. What had changed between us? I'd asked myself that question 100 times since Anne died. We'd always been close, Owen and me. He'd followed me into law, made me proud in ways I'd never known how to express. Then Valerie came along 7 years ago, and slowly, so slowly, I barely noticed the distance grew. Small things at first, missed calls, canceled plans, conversations that felt rehearsed. Then bigger things, arguments about money, I didn't understand his defensiveness whenever I asked about his work, the way Valerie always seemed to be listening even when she wasn't in the room. Saturday morning arrived with gray skies that threatened rain. I stood in front of my closet for 10 minutes trying to decide what you wear to a reconciliation that might be a trap. Finally settled on dark slacks and a button-down prosecutor casual, Anne used to call it. I checked the clock, 11:15. 7.5 hours until dinner. Malcolm called at noon. You going through with it? He's my son Malcolm. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Malcolm was quiet for a moment. Then, call me when you get home tonight. Or sooner if you need to. At 6:30, I locked my front door, got into my Volvo, and started the 40-minute drive to Greenwich. Rain had started light, but steady, the kind that makes November feel colder than it is. The windshield wipers beat a rhythm that matched my pulse, too fast, too anxious, too aware that something fundamental was about to shift. As I drove toward Owen's house that evening, Malcolm's words echoed in my head. When something feels wrong, it usually is. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I just didn't know how wrong yet. The house blazed with light as I pulled into the circular driveway just past 6:30. Every window glowed, every detail perfect, like a stage set waiting for its only audience. 482 Thornhill Drive sat on a corner lot that screamed old money trying to look effortless. The lawn was manicured, despite winter closing in, the landscaping deliberate in a way that cost serious money to maintain. I parked behind the BMW I'd seen 2 days earlier and took a breath that didn't quite fill my lungs. Through my prosecutor's eyes, I cataloged everything: the Belgian block edging on the driveway, the custom shutters, the architectural lighting that made the colonial facade look like something from a magazine spread. This wasn't just wealth. This was performance. The front door opened before I reached it. Valerie appeared in the doorway, backlit and smiling, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. At 34, she had that polished beauty that came from expensive salons and personal trainers, everything about her calculated to present exactly the right image. Simon. Her smile radiated warmth. Too much warmth. Like she'd practiced it in a mirror until it looked spontaneous. We're so glad you're here, Valerie. I managed a smile of my own as she stepped aside to let me in. Thank you for the invitation. Then I saw Owen standing in the hallway behind her, and my careful composure cracked. He'd lost weight. Not the healthy kind, the kind that comes from stress, from not eating, from something eating at you instead. His face looked drawn, older than 37 had any right to look. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and when those eyes finally met mine, they darted away almost immediately. Hey, Dad. His voice was quieter than I remembered. Owen. I moved toward him, and he met me halfway for a hug that lasted exactly 2 seconds before he pulled back. Stiff, perfunctory. Nothing like the embraces we used to share. Let me take your coat, Valerie said, already reaching. And then I'll give you the grand tour. I want you to see what we've built here. What we've built. The phrase stuck in my prosecutor's mind, like evidence that didn't quite fit the timeline. The living room came first, 14-foot ceilings, Italian leather furniture arranged with the precision of an interior designer, original art on the walls that I recognized from an auction catalog I'd seen at Malcolm's office. Each piece worth 5 figures minimum. Beautiful, I said, because it was. It just wasn't Owen. The kitchen followed sub-zero appliances, marble countertops that probably cost $40,000, a wine refrigerator, stocked with bottles I couldn't afford on my pension. Valerie narrated like a tour guide, her hand resting possessively on surfaces that gleamed under recessed lighting. Chiquidika. The renovation took 8 months, she said, running her fingers along the marble island. But it was worth every penny. Every penny. I did the math automatically, the kind of calculation I used to do when tracking financial crimes. The renovation alone would have run north of $200,000. Add the furnishings, the art, the cars outside, and we were looking at expenses that shouldn't exist on Owen's salary. We passed the home office, just a glimpse through a partially open door, and I caught sight of a mahogany desk, built-in bookshelves, a laptop open on the surface. Valerie closed that door quickly, steering me toward the dining room. The table was set for three with china that belonged in an estate sale crystal that caught the light from a chandelier that had to be Waterford. Fresh flowers arranged in a centerpiece that probably cost what I spent on groceries for a month. Every detail orchestrated, every element designed to impress. We sat. Valerie served appetizers, prosciutto and melon prepared with the kind of presentation that suggested either culinary school or too much time watching cooking shows. Small talk began: the weather, the neighborhood, the upcoming holidays. Surface-level conversation designed to avoid anything real. Owen barely spoke. He pushed food around his plate, took small sips of wine, his eyes never quite meeting mine across the table. When Valerie asked him to pass the bread, his hand shook slightly. I noticed. I always noticed. Finally, after 20 minutes of pleasantries that felt like pulling teeth, Owen cleared his throat. Shh, Dad, I know we haven't talked much lately. His voice carried something I couldn't quite identify: regret, maybe, or fear, or something darker beneath. Things have been complicated. Complicated how? I kept my tone neutral, the way I used to with witnesses who weren't sure they wanted to testify. Valerie's hand moved to Owen's shoulder before he could answer, a light touch, almost casual. But I saw him flinch, subtle, barely perceptible. But I'd spent 30 years reading body language in courtrooms. That wasn't the touch of comfort. That was control. Oh, you know, Valerie jumped in smoothly, her smile never wavering. Work, stress, life, balance, the usual challenges of building a career and a home at the same time. But we're managing beautifully, aren't we, honey? Owen nodded, but his eyes stayed on his plate. I looked at my son, avoiding my gaze at him, flinching under his wife's touch, and felt that old prosecutor's instinct, the one that had broken hundreds of cases, whisper that something here was very, very wrong. I just didn't expect to discover exactly what by the time this night ended. We'd made it through the appetizer, smoked salmon with caviar that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, before the prosecutor in me couldn't stay silent anymore. 30 years of instinct doesn't disappear when you retire. 7:15, and the dining room felt both elegant and suffocating. Valerie had poured wine, a bottle that looked expensive enough to require its own security detail, but I'd barely touched mine. My mind was too busy cataloging inconsistencies to relax into the pretense of a normal family dinner. The main course arrived: beef Wellington, with some kind of reduction sauce that Valerie explained in detail I immediately forgot. Owen cut his meat into precise small pieces but barely ate. I watched him push food around his plate the way he used to do as a kid, when something was bothering him. I started gentle. That's how you build a case: soft questions, first giving witnesses room to hang themselves with their own answers. Monsieur Owen, I said, keeping my tone casual, how's work? Did you make partner yet? He looked up startled, as if he'd forgotten I was there. Not yet. Maybe next year. Your firm must be doing well, though. You mentioned some big cases last time we talked. That had been 8 months ago. Before the silence, Owen's jaw tightened. We're doing fine, fine. The word prosecutors learned to recognize as a wall going up. I tried another angle. This house is really something. Business must be very good. We manage. Owen's voice had gone flat, defensive. He reached for his wine glass, and I noticed his hand trembled slightly before Valerie's fingers brushed his wrist, just for a second, but enough to steady him. Or control him. The renovation alone must have been a significant investment. I pressed gently. I couldn't help myself. The numbers weren't adding up, and my prosecutor's brain demanded they make sense. What was it? 200,000 more. That Owen set down his fork with enough force to make the china ring. Why do you always do this? Do what? This. He gestured vaguely, his face flushing. Judge. Criticize. Act like I can't make my own decisions without your approval. I'm not criticizing. You are. His voice rose, something desperate creeping into it. You're sitting here doing your prosecutor thing like I'm on trial, like I've done something wrong. The words hit harder than he probably intended. Because he was right, I was interrogating him. But he was also wrong because I wasn't judging him. I was trying to understand the numbers that wouldn't balance the lifestyle that shouldn't exist, the fear I kept seeing in his eyes. When I'm your father, I'm worried about what? That I'm successful. That I have a beautiful home and a wife who actually supports me, instead of second-guessing every choice I make. Valerie's hand moved to his shoulder, and this time the touch lasted longer. Sweetheart, she said softly, but there was steel underneath the sweetness. Let's not do this. Not tonight. Then she turned to me, her smile back in place like she'd flipped a switch. Simon, you look pale. Are you feeling all right? Maybe you should take a moment. The bathroom is upstairs, second door on the left. It was a deflection, obvious and calculated, but I also recognized the truth in what she was offering. I needed a minute away from this table, away from whatever dynamic I'd just walked into that felt more like quicksand than family dinner. I'm fine, I started to say, but Owen looked so confused, so lost, like he wasn't entirely sure why he'd gotten defensive in the first place. His eyes had that foggy quality I'd seen in witnesses who'd been coached so thoroughly they couldn't remember which story was real anymore. Something was very wrong here. Not just the money. Something deeper. Actually, I said, standing. Maybe I will take a moment. Thank you, Valerie. Of course. Her smile widened. Take your time. We'll wait for dessert. Owen didn't look at me as I left the table. He just stared at his plate, his wife's hand still resting on his shoulder, like an anchor or a chain, I couldn't tell which. I climbed the stairs slowly, my chest tight with tension I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Second door on the left, Valerie had said. But when I reached the top of the stairs, I saw another door, slightly ajar, soft light, spilling from what looked like an office. The same office Valerie had hurried past during the tour downstairs. Something pulled me toward it. Maybe instinct, maybe fate, or maybe just a prosecutor's inability to ignore evidence that doesn't fit the story he's been told. I should have gone to the bathroom. Should have taken my moment, composed myself, and returned to finish a dinner that was already fractured beyond repair. Instead, I turned toward that open door, and in doing so, I set into motion a series of events that would tear my family apart and force me to choose between my son's freedom and the truth I'd spent 30 years defending. I took a wrong turn at the top of the stairs. Or maybe it was the right turn, depending on how you measure the cost of truth. The bathroom was supposed to be the second door on the left. But the first door on the left stood open, light spilling into the hallway like an invitation I hadn't asked for. I told myself I was just checking to make sure everything was all right. Old habit from 30 years of walking through crime scenes, making sure doors that should be closed were closed, that details that seemed wrong actually were wrong. The office. I stepped inside, and the prosecutor in me cataloged everything before I could stop myself. Mahogany desk that probably cost $15,000. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with law books, some I recognized from my own career, others newer corporate law texts. A leather chair, the kind that screams success. Everything arranged to project competence and prosperity. And there, spread across the desk, were documents, not hidden, not locked away in drawers or filing cabinets. Just there, laid out like someone had been reviewing them and gotten interrupted. Or like someone had left them there deliberately, knowing exactly who might find them. I shouldn't have looked closer. Should have backed out of that room, gone to the bathroom like I'd been told, and returned downstairs to finish a dinner that was already beyond salvaging. But I'm a prosecutor. Was a prosecutor. And prosecutors don't walk away from evidence. I moved to the desk, telling myself I was just glancing, not prying. The lie lasted about 5 seconds. The first document I saw was a wire transfer authorization. My eyes, trained to scan legal documents the way other people scan newspapers, caught the key details immediately. $850,000. Owen's signature at the bottom, clean, confident, identical to the signature I'd seen on birthday cards and legal briefs for years. But it was the recipient that made my blood run cold. Meridian Holdings, LLC. I'd never heard of it. And I'd spent 3 decades tracking financial crimes sophisticated enough to require shell companies and offshore accounts. I knew what I was looking at. My hands moved without my permission, shuffling through the other papers. Each one worse than the last. More wire transfers. Different amounts, different dates, but always to the same handful of companies, Meridian Holdings. Coastal Ventures, Incorporated. Neither name appeared anywhere on Owen's firm's public client list. I'd checked their website obsessively in the months since our relationship fractured. Company letterhead from Owen's law firm. Authorizations dated over the past 18 months. Invoices for services that sounded legitimate: legal consulting, contract review, corporate restructuring, but with vendor names I'd bet my pension didn't exist outside of these documents. And there, tucked beneath the pile, account statements from banks in the Cayman Islands. $850,000 moved in careful increments over 18 months. Not small enough to avoid detection, but structured just carefully enough to delay it. The work of someone who understood financial systems, but wasn't quite expert enough to cover every track. The work of my son. I stood there, papers trembling in my hands, and felt something inside me fracture. This was Owen. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, to throw a baseball, to stand up for what was right even when it cost him. The young man who'd followed me into law because he believed we both believed in justice, in truth, in the system that was supposed to protect people from exactly this kind of crime. I remembered teaching him about honesty when he was 8 years old, after he'd lied about breaking Anne's favorite vase. I'd sat him down and explained that lies have consequences, that truth is the foundation everything else is built on. He'd cried and apologized and never lied to me again. Or so I'd thought. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind to what was happening right in front of me? 6 months of silence. And I'd told myself it was just distance, just the natural evolution of a relationship as a child became an adult. I'd been so focused on feeling rejected that I'd missed the real story. But even as grief threatened to overwhelm me, the prosecutor in my brain kept working, kept analyzing, kept building the case I didn't want to build. Evidence doesn't lie. Signatures can be forged, but these looked genuine. Dates and amounts matched. Paper trails led exactly where they appeared to lead. Everything I'd spent 30 years learning to recognize as proof of guilt was right here in my hands. 30 seconds of paralysis. 30 seconds where I stood frozen, caught between being Simon the father and Simon the prosecutor, knowing I couldn't be both anymore. Then my hands moved, trembling so badly I almost dropped my phone. I took it out of my pocket and started photographing. Every document. Every page. Wire transfers, invoices, account statements, signatures. The flash seemed too bright in the dim office, each click of the shutter loud enough to wake the dead. My heart hammered against my ribs. What was I doing? This was my son. This was evidence that would destroy him, destroy our family, destroy whatever fragile hope I'd had of reconciliation. But I kept photographing because that's what prosecutors do. We document, we preserve evidence, we build cases even when every cell in our body screams to walk away. I'm doing my job, I whispered to the empty room. Even when it destroys me. I heard footsteps on the stairs. My hands jerked, nearly dropping the phone. I shoved it back into my pocket, forced the documents back into the arrangement I'd found them in. Not perfect, but close enough. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The footsteps grew louder, reaching the top of the stairs, moving down the hallway toward me. I turned toward the door and weighted the phone heavy in my pocket. the weight of what I'd just documented crushing my chest like a physical thing. The door swung open. Valerie stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light, in a way that would have been perfect if she'd staged it herself. And for just a fraction of a second, so brief I almost missed it. Her perfect mask slipped, and I saw something cold flicker across her face. "What are you doing in Owen's office?" Her voice carried surprise, but not panic. I noticed that. 30 years of reading witnesses teaches you to hear what's missing as much as what's there. I'd been caught, but I'd also made my decision the moment I started photographing those documents. There was no going back now. Well, I was about to ask Owen the same question. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "About these." I gestured to the papers spread across the desk. Valerie stepped into the room, her expression shifting concern, replacing that flash of coldness so smoothly I might have imagined it. "Those are private documents. You have no right. These documents show embezzlement." I cut her off, and the prosecutor's voice I'd used in 100 courtrooms came back like I'd never stopped using it. Corporate fraud. $850,000 moved through shell companies to offshore accounts. All with Owen's signature. Her eyes widened. If I hadn't spent 3 decades watching people lie under oath, I might have believed the shock on her face was genuine. That's impossible. Owen would never." Footsteps pounded up the stairs, heavy and urgent. Owen burst through the doorway, his face flushed from running. "What's going on?" I heard. He saw me standing at his desk, saw the documents in my hands and all the color drained from his face. "Dad." His voice cracked. "Why are you going through my things?" The accusation in his tone hurt more than it should have. I was the one who'd found evidence of a crime. I was the one standing in a room full of proof that my son had committed fraud. And yet somehow in his eyes, I was the one who'd done something wrong. "Owen." I fought to keep my voice level. "Please tell me this isn't what I think it is." I don't." He looked genuinely confused, his eyes darting from me to the papers, to Valerie and back. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Wire transfer authorizations," I said, hearing my voice go cold in the way it used to when a witness's story stopped making sense. "Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies with no legitimate business, all bearing your signature, dated over the past 18 months. Owen reached for the documents, but I pulled them back. Evidence preservation, another old habit that wouldn't die. "Let me see those," he said, and there was something desperate in his voice now, something that sounded almost like fear. "Dad, I don't understand what's happening." "Oh my God." Valerie's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with what looked like horror. If I hadn't seen that cold flicker moments ago, I would have sworn her shock was real. "Owen, what have you done?" Owen whirled on her. "I haven't done anything. I don't know what these are." But even as he protested, I saw doubt creeping into his expression, like he was searching his own memory and finding gaps he couldn't explain. The 3 of us stood there in that office, the evidence of a crime spread across the desk between us. Like an accusation, none of us knew how to answer. Owen confused and defensive, Valerie playing the shocked wife with an Oscar-worthy performance, and me, the father who'd just discovered his son was either a criminal or something worse, a victim so thoroughly manipulated he didn't even know what was real anymore. "Dad, please." Owen's voice broke, and I heard the little boy in it, the one who used to come to me when he was scared, when he needed help, when he believed I could fix anything. "We can work this out. Whatever you think is happening, we can explain. Just don't." I pulled out my phone. "Dad, no." Owen lunged forward, but Valerie's hand on his arm stopped him. "Think about what you're doing." But I had thought about it. I'd thought about it in the 30 seconds I stood frozen in this office holding evidence that would destroy my son. I'd thought about it while photographing documents with shaking hands. I'd thought about every case I'd ever prosecuted, every time I'd stood in front of a judge and jury and sworn to uphold the law regardless of who it hurt. The truth matters, evidence matters, justice matters. Even when it destroys you. I dialed 911. This is Simon Brennan. I said, my voice mechanical, distant, like it belonged to someone else. I want to report corporate embezzlement. Dad, please. Owen's voice cracked completely. Don't do this. The dispatcher asked for details. I gave them the address, my son's address. The house at 482 Thornhill Drive, where I'd celebrated holidays, where we'd tried to rebuild something that had already been broken by forces I was only beginning to understand. $850,000, I heard myself say. Moved through shell companies over 18 months. The evidence is here. All of it. Owen stood frozen, his face white, his mouth moving, but no sound coming out. And behind him, Valerie's hand rested on his shoulder, steady, possessive, controlling. Her eyes met mine over his head, cold, calculated. And something else I couldn't name yet. Something that looked almost like triumph. "Officers are on their way," the dispatcher said in my ear. I lowered the phone. "They're coming." Owen's whisper was barely audible. How could you do this? I didn't have an answer. Not one that would make sense to him, standing there in the wreckage of his life with a wife whose mask had slipped just long enough for me to see what lay beneath. The sirens came faster than I expected, barely 15 minutes. Turns out justice doesn't wait for your heart to stop breaking. 8:15, and the quiet perfection of Thornhill Drive shattered under flashing red and blue lights. 2 patrol cars pulled into the circular driveway, their lights painting the colonial facade in colors that didn't belong in neighborhoods like this. 4 officers emerged, their expressions professional and unreadable. I met them at the door before they could knock. Mr. Brennan. The lead officer was a woman in her 40s, her nameplate reading Jenkins. "You called in a report of corporate embezzlement?" "Yes." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "That's my son. The evidence is in the home office upstairs." I handed her my phone, the screen still showing the last photo I'd taken, a wire transfer authorization for $200,000, Owen's signature clear at the bottom. Officer Jenkins scrolled through the images, her expression never changing. Professional detachment, I'd seen it on my own face 1,000 times in courtrooms. "And the original documents?" "Oh, upstairs. Office at the top of the stairs, first door on the left." She gestured to 2 of the officers who moved past me into the house. I heard Valerie's sharp intake of breath from the living room, but didn't turn to look. Couldn't look. Not yet. "Mr. Brennan," Jenkins said quietly, "I need to confirm you understand we'll be investigating your son based on this report." "I understand." 2 words that cost more than anything I'd ever said in my life. The officers returned after 5 minutes that felt like hours. One of them nodded to Jenkins. "Documents match the photos. Wire transfers, offshore accounts, shell company registrations, all bearing the same signature." Owen stood in the living room, where I'd left him, his face the color of old paper. He wasn't looking at me anymore, just staring at some point in the middle distance, like if he focused hard enough, this might all disappear. "I can't believe you're doing this," he said, his voice hollow. I wanted to tell him I couldn't believe it either, that every cell in my body was screaming to take it back, to tell the officers there'd been a mistake, to burn those documents and pretend I'd never seen them. But prosecutors don't get to unsee evidence. And fathers don't get to choose which laws their children have to follow. Valerie rushed to Owen's side, her performance flawless. Tears streamed down her carefully made-up face as she clung to his arm. This is a mistake," she said to the officers, her voice breaking in exactly the right places. "Owen would never do something like this. He's being framed. Someone must have—" "Ma'am," Jenkins interrupted gently, "we'll be conducting a full investigation." Then she turned to Owen, and I watched my son's world end. Owen Brennan, you need to come with us." "I didn't do anything." Owen's voice cracked desperation flooding through the shock. "Dad, tell them." But Jenkins was already speaking the words I'd heard 100 times in my career, suddenly unbearable when directed at my own son. "Like, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." "Dad, please." Owen reached toward me, but one of the officers gently caught his arm. The handcuffs came out. Chrome metal, standard issue, the kind I'd seen on wrists thousands of times. The click as they closed around Owen's wrists was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. 30 years of prosecuting criminals, and I'd never imagined I'd see this. My son, pale and trembling, being read his rights in his own living room, while his wife sobbed and neighbors' lights started clicking on up and down the street. They led him toward the door. Owen looked back at me one last time, not with anger, not yet. Just shock, betrayal. The look of someone whose world had just split in half and didn't understand why. His lips moved, forming words I could barely hear over the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears. "I didn't do this, Dad." Then they were taking him outside, guiding him into the back of the patrol car, with the practiced efficiency of officers who'd done this 1,000 times. The door closed. The car pulled away, taking my son toward a jail cell and a future I'd just destroyed. Neighbors emerged onto their porches. Mr. Patterson from next door, Mrs. Wallace from across the street. Whispers started, heads turning toward me like I was the criminal, not the one who'd called for justice. Maybe they were right. Valerie stood on the porch, and I forced myself to watch her performance. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs that looked real enough to fool anyone who hadn't seen that flash of cold satisfaction in the office earlier. But just before the tears came, just for one fraction of a second, she glanced at me. The expression on her face wasn't grief, it was satisfaction. Cold, calculated, triumphant. So quick I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then the mask was back, and she was the devastated wife again, destroyed by her husband's arrest and her father-in-law's betrayal. She turned and walked back into the house. The door closed behind her with a soft but final click, a sound like a cell door locking echoing in my chest where my heart used to be. Sunday passed in silence. I sat in my house, phone turned off, staring at nothing. Until Monday morning when the silence shattered. I'd spent that first day alone, Sunday, December 1st, unable to eat, unable to sleep, obsessively scrolling through the photos on my phone. The wire transfers, the signatures, the offshore accounts, every detail burned into my memory like evidence I couldn't unsee. But something kept nagging at me. A question I couldn't quite articulate: could Owen really have been this careless? Monday morning answered a different question: whether my decision would stay private. The answer was no. The headlines hit before breakfast. I made the mistake of turning my phone back on and watching it explode with notifications. Legendary prosecutor's son arrested for embezzlement. Simon Brennan turns an own son for corporate fraud. Family loyalty versus justice, former DA's impossible choice. My name appeared more than Owen's in every article. Not because of what he'd allegedly done, but because of what I'd done, called the police on my own child. The story wasn't about corporate crime, it was about me. Simon Brennan, who prosecuted over 300 cases during his 28-year career, made the devastating choice to report his son Owen to authorities Saturday evening. Sources say Brennan discovered evidence of embezzlement totaling $850,000. The phone started ringing. Old colleagues, former adversaries, people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly desperate to weigh in on the most painful decision of my life. District Attorney Sarah Morgan called first. "Simon, I heard. I'm so sorry. If you need anything..." "I'm fine," I lied. Bill Martinez, who'd worked with me for 15 years before I retired, didn't mince words. "You did what you had to do. That's who you are." But others didn't call. Their silence spoke louder than any words of support. I could imagine the conversations happening without me, debates about whether I'd done the right thing, whether family should come before law, whether a father who'd turn in his son could be trusted with anyone's secrets. My legacy, built over 3 decades of public service, was now forever tied to this, the prosecutor who arrested his own child. Tuesday, December 3rd, I sat at my kitchen table and went through those photos again, trying to see them the way a jury would see them, trying to understand how Owen could have been so stupid, so reckless, so convinced he'd never get caught. But the more I looked, the more something felt wrong. Not with the evidence itself that was damning clear, undeniable, but with how I'd found it. Documents left out on a desk, not hidden, not locked away, just there, perfectly arranged for someone to discover. In an office Owen rarely used, according to what Valerie had mentioned during the house tour. On a night when I'd been invited to dinner after 6 months of silence, I pushed the thought away. Coincidences happen. Criminals get careless. And I was a father desperate to find any excuse to believe my son was innocent. Wednesday morning, December 4th, I drove to the county jail for the first time in my life as a visitor instead of a prosecutor. The visiting room was exactly as institutional as I remembered: glass partitions, metal chairs bolted to the floor, phones that smelled like disinfectant and desperation. I'd been in dozens of these rooms over my career, sitting on the other side, preparing witnesses and victims for trial. Never thought I'd be here for my son. They let Owen in, and my heart cracked all over again. 4 days. He'd only been in custody for 4 days, and he looked like he'd aged 4 years. Thinner. How was that even possible in less than a week, with dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there Saturday night? His hands shook as he picked up the phone on his side of the glass. "Dad." Just that one word, and I heard everything he couldn't say. Betrayal. Fear. A desperate plea for help from the man who'd put him here. Owen. I forced my voice to stay steady. "I need you to tell me the truth. I didn't transfer that money." His words came fast, urgent, like he'd been rehearsing them since his arrest. "I don't even know half those company names. Meridian Holdings, Coastal Ventures." "Dad, I've never heard of them. Your signature is on every document." "I know." His voice cracked. "But I didn't sign them. I swear to God I didn't. Someone must have." I'd heard this script 1,000 times. The desperate denial, the conspiracy theories, the insistence that someone else, anyone else, was responsible. Guilty people always had stories, but Owen's eyes held something I hadn't seen in those other defendants. Not calculation, genuine confusion. "You have to believe me," he said quietly. "Please." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. "Owen, talk to me about your memory. Have you been forgetting things?" He blinked, surprised by the question. Yeah, actually. There are days at the office that are just blank. I thought it was stress. Valerie said I was working too hard, that I needed to." He stopped, his brow furrowing like he was trying to catch a thought that kept slipping away. I leaned closer to the glass, studying him the way I used to study witnesses. His pupils were dilated despite the harsh fluorescent lights. His speech occasionally slurred just slightly, and those tremors in his hands weren't just nerves. Something was wrong here. Something beyond the pressure of jail, beyond the stress of arrest. "Owen, have you been taking any medication?" "Anything Valerie might have given you. She makes me tea sometimes, in the evenings. Says it helps me sleep." His voice trailed off, uncertainty creeping in. "Why?" Before I could answer, the guard called time. Our 15 minutes were up. Owen pressed his hand against the glass. "Dad, please, don't give up on me." I put my hand up to match his, separated by barriers we might never cross again. "I won't." But as they led him away, I wasn't sure if that was a promise I could keep. Malcolm's call came through my car speakers as I pulled out of the jail parking lot. Simon, I've been thinking about those documents. Something doesn't add up. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What do you mean? Meet me tomorrow morning. Roosevelt's Cafe, 8 o'clock. I think we need to look at this more carefully. A small flame of hope ignited in my chest. Terrible, dangerous hope. Because if Owen was innocent, if I'd been wrong, if those documents had been planted, then what the hell had I done? Thursday morning, nearly a week after I'd watched my son being led away in handcuffs, Malcolm called at 7 a.m. with 3 words that changed everything: hire an expert. What kind of expert, I asked. A handwriting analyst. A forensic document examiner. Someone who can tell us whether those signatures are real. He paused. I already hired one. Dr. Eleanor Vaughn, former FBI consultant. She's testified in over 200 cases. Meet me at her lab this afternoon. 2 o'clock. Hartford. The drive to Hartford took an hour filled with doubt. What if I was wrong? What if Owen had been telling the truth in that jail visiting room, his hands trembling, his pupils dilated, swearing he had never signed those documents? What if my son was innocent, and I had destroyed him because I was more prosecutor than father? But another voice, trained by 28 years of cases, whispered something worse. What if I wanted him innocent so badly that I was inventing conspiracies? What if this was just denial? A desperate man trying to undo the irreversible. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of Vaughn Forensic Associates, I wasn't sure which possibility frightened me more. The lab sat on the second floor of an unremarkable office building. Malcolm was waiting in the lobby, his face carefully neutral, the expression of an investigator who'd found something but wasn't ready to name it. She's been analyzing the documents since yesterday, he said, as we climbed the stairs. I pulled copies from the police file through a contact. All legitimate. Dr. Eleanor Vaughn's workspace looked exactly like a place where truth hid in details too small for most people to see. White walls, specialized lighting, microscopes, comparison equipment, filing cabinets marked with case numbers. At 55, she carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being right under oath. Mr. Brennan, she said, shaking my hand. Malcolm explained the situation. I've examined the questioned signatures and compared them to verified exemplars from your son's legal work. She led us to a light table covered in photographs, dozens of signatures. All of them looked like Owen's careful professional handwriting. Explain your methodology, I said, defaulting to prosecutor language because I didn't know how else to prepare for what might follow. Handwriting analysis evaluates pressure patterns, pen angles, stroke, continuity rhythm, and micro-tremors, she replied. We also examine letter connections, spacing, and baseline alignment. She placed 2 signatures under magnification. To me, they looked identical. These signatures, she said, indicating the embezzlement documents, are convincing to the untrained eye. The overall form is correct. The flow is similar. Whoever created them studied your son's signature extensively, likely for months. My pulse quickened. But look closer. She adjusted the lens. The pressure on the downstroke of the B is unnaturally uniform. A genuine signature varies pressure subconsciously. This one does not. She moved to another comparison. Here, see this slight hesitation at the curve. Your son's authentic signatures move through curves confidently. These pause for a fraction of a second. That's the hesitation of copying, not writing. Malcolm leaned in. Show him the baseline. Dr. Vaughn placed a ruler beneath several signatures. The baseline angle is off by 0.7 degrees. It's consistent across all the questioned documents, but different from your son's known signatures. Motor memory is extremely difficult to fake. My hands tightened on the table. The room felt too bright. So these signatures, I began, are forgeries, she said calmly. Highly skilled ones, created by someone with extensive access to authentic samples. But they are unequivocally not written by Owen Brennan. The world tilted. My son was innocent. I had reported my innocent child. watched him be arrested, allowed him to spend a week in jail while his reputation collapsed, and the media destroyed his name. I had been the prosecutor who turned in his own son. My legs failed. I sank into a chair, my professional mind and my father's heart colliding in the same unbearable realization. "What have I done?" "Mr. Brennan," Dr. Vaughn asked gently. "No," I said hoarsely. "I'm not all right." Malcolm rested a hand on my shoulder. "Focus, Simon. This proves Owen was framed, which means someone had constant access to his signature, someone who could study and practice it. Daily access," Dr. Vaughn added. "Time, privacy, and familiarity." Malcolm looked at me. Who fits that profile? My thoughts raced. Colleagues, staff assistants. Then I remembered Valerie's hand on Owen's shoulder at dinner. The way he flinched. Her composed grief. The tea she insisted he drink, the one that left him confused, unfocused. The documents displayed too neatly on his desk. "His wife," I said quietly. "Valerie." Malcolm nodded once. He'd already known. "She had everything," I continued. "His office access, his passwords, 7 years of exposure to his signature. Time to practice, time to perfect it." "But why?" Malcolm asked. I didn't know yet, but I was going to find out. Tuesday afternoon, 10 days after Owen's arrest, I returned to the county jail. I needed to see him again. Needed to look him in the eye and tell him I believed him. I never got the chance to deliver that message the way I'd planned. The jail visit was brief, just long enough to tell Owen what Dr. Vaughn had found. That the signatures were forged. That someone had framed him. That I knew he was innocent. For the first time in 10 days, I saw something besides despair in my son's eyes. "You believe me?" His voice cracked through the phone, his hand pressed against the glass partition, like he could reach through it if he just tried hard enough. "I should have believed you from the start." The words cost me everything to say, but they were true. "I'm going to fix this, Owen. I'm going to find out who did this to you." His eyes filled with tears he wouldn't let fall. Not here, not where other inmates could see. But I saw them. And I saw hope, fragile, desperate hope, that maybe his nightmare was finally going to end. The guard called time. Owen mouthed, "Thank you," as they led him away. I walked out of that visiting room, feeling lighter than I had in days, like maybe I could actually make this right. Like maybe being a prosecutor and being a father didn't have to be mutually exclusive after all. The parking garage was on level 3. Late afternoon on a Tuesday meant it was nearly empty. Visiting hours had ended for most people, and the shift change for jail staff wouldn't happen for another hour. My Honda Civic sat in the far corner where I'd left it under a flickering fluorescent light that cast uneven shadows across the concrete. I was halfway to my car when I noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet. Just the echo of my own footsteps on the concrete floor, the distant hum of traffic from the street below, and nothing else. No other cars starting, no voices, no footsteps but mine. The prosecutor's instinct that had kept me alive through 30 years of dealing with dangerous people whispered a warning I should have listened to sooner. I turned, reaching for my phone, but 2 men were already stepping out from behind concrete support pillars. Dark clothes, gloves, ski masks. Moving with the kind of purposeful efficiency that had nothing to do with desperation and everything to do with professionalism. "Can I help you?" I kept my voice steady, already knowing the answer, already calculating distances and exits, and realizing I was too far from my car, too far from the stairs, too alone. They didn't answer. They didn't need to. The first one grabbed my arms before I could raise them to defend myself. I tried to break free, opened my mouth to shout, but the second attacker was already moving. Pain exploded across my ribs, a sensation so sharp and total that for a moment I forgot how to breathe. I'd been hit before back in my younger days, when prosecutors sometimes had to break up courtroom fights. This was different. This was someone who knew exactly where and how to hit to cause maximum damage. I tried to fight back. 40 years ago, I'd been an athlete, baseball, track, enough gym time to stay in shape. But I was 65 now, and these men were professionals. Another strike, this one to my kidney. Everything swam my vision, going dark at the edges. My knees gave out. I fell, and my head hit the concrete floor with a crack that sounded louder than it probably was. Sharp pain, then nothing. When I came back to consciousness, seconds later, minutes, paramedic Jackson was kneeling beside me, shining a light in my eyes and asking me questions I couldn't quite process. Officer Jenkins stood nearby, radio crackling on her shoulder, taking notes. "Mr. Brennan, can you hear me? How many fingers am I holding up?" I tried to answer, but my ribs screamed in protest with every breath. My wallet was still in my back pocket. My phone lay a few feet away, screen cracked but intact. My watch was still on my wrist. Just a random mugging. Jenkins was saying to someone, another officer maybe, or dispatch. "Wrong place, wrong time. We get these in this garage sometimes. Probably looking for drug money." "No," my voice came out hoarse. "They weren't addicts. They were professionals." Jenkins looked down at me, her expression carefully neutral. "We'll check the security cameras, Mr. Brennan. Try not to move too much." The ambulance ride blurred into a series of cold assessments and clinical language. 3 broken ribs, mild concussion, bruised kidney. Lucky you didn't puncture a lung. Lucky it wasn't worse. I didn't feel lucky. By the time they'd settled me into a hospital room with pain medication that barely touched the sharp agony in my side, evening had fallen. Malcolm arrived at 7, his face grim in a way that told me he'd already been working. Security footage," he said without preamble, pulling up something on his tablet. "The jail finally sent it over. Watch this." The footage was grainy but clear enough. 2 men entering the parking garage at 3:50 p.m., 40 minutes before I'd arrived, moving with purpose toward level 3, taking positions behind the support pillars. Then other people, a woman with 2 children leaving, an elderly man, a young couple. The attackers let them all pass, staying hidden, waiting. Then me at 4:30, walking from the elevator toward my car. The attackers moving. The brief struggle. Me falling. Then they were gone out. The stairwell disappeared into the city. The whole thing lasted less than 90 seconds. "They were waiting for you," Malcolm said quietly, his detective's face set in hard lines. This wasn't random. I shifted in the hospital bed, and my ribs screamed in protest. "She knows." Malcolm didn't need to ask who I meant. "See, Valerie knows you're investigating her. And she just sent you a very clear message." He set the tablet down on the side table, his expression dangerous. "Back off, or next time will be worse." Day 2. In the hospital. Thursday morning, I woke to find Malcolm sitting in the chair beside my bed, laptop open, his face wearing an expression I'd learned to recognize over years of working together. He'd found something, and it was bad. Before I reveal the truth about who was really behind all of this, please pause for a moment. What comes next truly shocked me, not because of what I discovered, but because of who was responsible. If you've ever experienced being betrayed or manipulated by someone close to you without realizing it, please share your story in the comments. I will listen and read every single one. And please note, the next part of this story includes some fictional elements created for storytelling and reflection. If this kind of content isn't for you, you're free to stop the video here. But I'm mourning, I said, trying to sit up. My ribs screamed in protest, reminding me that pain medication only does so much. "You look like you didn't sleep." I didn't. Malcolm turned the laptop so I could see the screen. I ran a deep background check on Valerie Thompson, the kind that goes beyond what's publicly available. And Valerie Thompson didn't exist before 7 years ago. I blinked, trying to process that through the fog of medication and pain. "What do you mean she didn't exist?" "I mean her birth certificate, her social security number, her employment history, Everything that makes a person legally real either doesn't exist or only dates back to 2018. She's a ghost, a construct. Someone built that identity from scratch. The room felt colder suddenly. So who is she really? Malcolm pulled up a file, and a different name appeared on the screen, Kendra Grayson. So born Kendra Marie Grayson, 1991, Philadelphia, and Simon, her father, was Douglas Grayson. The name hit me like a physical blow. Grayson. That name sounds familiar. It should. Malcolm's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up archived news articles. Headlines from 2010 filled the screen. Douglas Grayson, businessman, securities fraud. He defrauded investors of $3 million through a Ponzi scheme disguised as a legitimate investment firm. The articles showed courtroom sketches, a photograph of a man in his 40s being led away in handcuffs, protest signs from victims demanding justice. It was the kind of high-profile white-collar crime case that dominated news cycles for weeks. How he was convicted, Malcolm continued. Sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, media circus, victims testifying, the whole thing. I remember the case, I said slowly. But I didn't prosecute it. I was in organized crime back then. White-collar fraud wasn't my division. I know. Malcolm's expression stayed grim. But here's where it gets worse. 3 years into his sentence, Douglas Grayson committed suicide, hanged himself in his cell. The clinical words didn't soften the horror of what he was describing. A man driven to such desperation that death seemed preferable to 13 more years behind bars. He left behind an 8-year-old daughter. Malcolm said quietly. Kendra. Her mother had already passed away cancer 2 years before the trial. After Douglas died, Kendra was raised by her paternal grandmother, Dorothy Grayson, who also died in 2013, just a few months after Douglas. Cancer as well. I stared at the screen, at the tragedy that had shaped a child's entire life. Parents dead. Father's reputation destroyed. Raised by a grandmother who died grieving for her son. And somewhere in all of that, an 8-year-old girl had learned to hate. Show me the trial coverage, I said. Malcolm pulled up more articles. Newspapers from 2010. Archived television news clips available online. Every major outlet had covered the Grayson trial. Because of the amount of money involved, the number of victims, the spectacle of a respected businessman revealed as a fraud. And in every single article there was a photograph of me, standing at a podium, walking up courthouse steps, in front of the district attorney's office logo. My face younger, less gray, but unmistakably mine, staring out from dozens of news stories about Douglas Grayson's trial and conviction. Why is my face in these articles? My voice came out hoarse. I didn't prosecute this case. Stiquia, you were famous that year, Malcolm said. You just won the Costello organized crime case, remember, the one that took down half the mob leadership in the state. Biggest conviction of your career. The media loved you. They used your photo for every story that came out of the DA's office that year, regardless of which prosecutor was actually involved. I felt sick. But I never touched the Grayson case. I know. I pulled the court records. The actual prosecutor was Bernard Lancaster, Economic Crimes Division. You two never even worked in the same building. Bernard Lancaster. I barely remembered him, a competent lawyer who'd retired years before. I did move to Florida, disappeared into the anonymous mass of retired prosecutors, whose names nobody remembers once the headlines fade. But Kendra doesn't know that, I said, understanding, crystallizing with horrible clarity. She was 8 years old, Malcolm said. Old enough to understand that her father was going to prison. Old enough to watch the news coverage, or see the newspapers, or hear adults talking about the trial. And your face was everywhere, in every article, every broadcast. The man who put criminals away, the prosecutor who never lost it. She thought I was the one who convicted her father. More than that. Malcolm pulled up another photo of me at a press conference announcing the Costello verdict. The date stamp showed it was from the same week Douglas Grayson had been sentenced. She thought you were the one who destroyed her family, who took her father away, who left her alone with a dying grandmother and no future except whatever she could build from the ashes. I stared at that photograph, a younger version of myself, confident and righteous, standing before cameras and proclaiming victory in the name of justice. I'd been proud that day. The Costello conviction had made my career, had established my reputation as a prosecutor who could take down anyone no matter how powerful. And 15 years later, that same reputation, that same face plastered across newspapers during someone else's trial, had become the foundation of a revenge plot so elaborate it had taken 7 years to execute. She married Owen to get to me. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Malcolm nodded, his expression grave. She would have been 27 when she met him. Old enough to have spent years planning, creating a new identity, researching your family, finding the perfect way in. 7 years of marriage, living with him, sleeping beside him, pretending to love him. All to destroy me by destroying him first. Revenge doesn't always come quick, Malcolm said quietly. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it waits for exactly the right moment. I thought about Owen in that jail cell, confused and broken, his memory full of gaps from whatever Valerie Kendra had been feeding him. I thought about the forged signatures, the elaborate financial scheme, the documents left so conveniently for me to find. The dinner invitation, after 6 months of silence, timed perfectly to ensure I'd discover the evidence and do exactly what I did, call the police on my own son. She wanted me to arrest him, I said. That was the goal. Not to steal money, not to frame Owen and get away with it. She wanted me to be the one who destroyed my own child, the way she thinks I destroyed her father. Eye for an eye, Malcolm said. You take her family, she takes yours. I looked at the photo of Kendra as an 8-year-old found in one of the archived articles, a small, serious face at her father's sentencing hearing, sitting beside her grandmother in the courtroom gallery. Even then, her eyes held something cold and determined. 15 years of grief. 15 years of rage. 15 years of planning revenge against a man who'd never even known she existed. What's her endgame? I asked. She's accomplished the first part, got me to arrest Owen, destroyed our relationship, wrecked his reputation. But that attack in the parking garage wasn't random. She knows I'm investigating, so what's the final move? Malcolm closed the laptop. That's what we need to find out. Before she makes it. I barely slept Thursday night. Kendra's story haunted me, the 8-year-old girl who lost her father, raised by a grandmother who planted hatred instead of healing. By Friday morning, discharged with bandaged ribs and a bottle of pain medication, I had only one thought: I had to warn Owen. I signed myself out against medical advice at 8 a.m. My ribs screamed with every breath, but the pain was nothing compared to the urgency. Valerie Kendra knew I was investigating her. She'd already sent men to attack me. Whatever her endgame was, it was coming soon. And Owen was still sitting in a jail cell, confused and vulnerable, with no idea his wife was the architect of his destruction. The drive to the county jail took 40 minutes that felt like hours. By 10 o'clock, I was back in that visiting room with its institutional green walls, glass partitions, and phones that smelled like disinfectant and desperation. The same room where 2 weeks ago I'd watched my son's world collapse. The same room where I'd promised to fix this. They let Owen in, and I had to force myself not to react to how much worse he looked. 2 weeks. Just 2 weeks in custody, and he'd lost weight. I didn't think he had to lose. Dark circles shadowed his eyes so deeply they looked like bruises. His hands shook as he reached for the phone, and when he sat down, his movements were slow, uncertain, like someone much older than 37. Dad. He picked up the phone and his voice carried something I hadn't heard in years. Relief. Malcolm told me about the signatures. You believe me. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, desperate, grateful, the words of someone who'd been drowning and finally felt solid ground beneath his feet. I should have believed you from the start. I said and meant it with every fiber of my being. Owen, there's more. Things you need to know about Valerie. His expression shifted, wariness creeping in where relief had been. What about her? Your wife isn't who she says she is. I kept my voice steady, clinical, the way I used to deliver devastating news to witnesses who didn't want to hear it. Her real name is Kendra Grayson. Her father was Douglas Grayson. Owen's face went blank with confusion. I don't understand. Who's Douglas Grayson? So I told him. The 2010 trial. The securities fraud. The suicide 3 years into a federal sentence. The 8-year-old girl who blamed me for destroying her family, even though I'd never touched her father's case. The 15 years of planning. The false identity. The marriage designed as revenge. With every word, I watched my son's face cycle through emotions. Confusion, disbelief, anger. You're making this up. Owen's voice rose defensive in the way it used to get when he was cornered as a teenager. You can't accept that I'm happy, that I chose someone you didn't approve of, so you're creating these conspiracy theories. Owen, listen to me. She framed you. She's been planning this for years. The signatures were forged. The shell companies were hers. She set you up to take the fall for a crime she committed, knowing I'd find the evidence, knowing That's insane. Owen slammed his free hand against the glass partition, and a guard took a step forward before backing off. Valerie loves me. She visits me every day. She's the only one who... He stopped. His hand went to his temple and he winced like something sharp had just pierced his skull. I leaned closer to the glass. Son, when did your memory start getting foggy? Owen hesitated, and I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. The anger was still there, but something else was creeping in. Fear. I've been so tired lately. Can't remember conversations I had the day before. Valerie says it's the stress that I'm working too hard that... What else does Valerie say? She makes me tea in the evenings. Says it helps me relax, helps me sleep. Owen's voice had gone quieter, less certain. I've been drinking it for, I don't know, months, maybe longer. My chest tightened. What kind of tea? I don't remember. The confusion on his face deepened into something like panic. Why can't I remember Dad? Why can't I remember basic things like what kind of tea I drink every night? I gentled my voice the way I used to when he was small and frightened by nightmares. Because she's been drugging you, Owen. Keeping you compliant, confused. So you wouldn't question the documents. So you wouldn't notice when things didn't add up. So your memory would be too foggy to defend yourself. No. But the denial was weak now, crumbling. She wouldn't. She married you to get to me. You're not the target. I am. You're just the weapon she chose to destroy me with. Owen sat very still. The phone pressed to his ear, his eyes unfocused, like he was trying to see through a fog that had been thick for too long. I could see him struggling, wanting to defend the woman he'd loved for 7 years, but also feeling the pieces click into place, with horrible, undeniable logic. "Leave 5 minutes," the guard called. "If what you're saying is true..." Owen's voice cracked. "Why, what did I do to her?" "Oh, nothing. You did nothing. This was never about you." Through the narrow window in the door behind me, I caught a glimpse of the waiting area. Valerie stood there watching us through the glass. She couldn't hear our conversation. The visiting rooms were soundproofed, but her expression was clear even from this distance. Cold, calculating. The mask she'd worn for 7 years completely gone, now that she thought no one important was watching. Her hand reached into her purse. Something small white. A pharmacy bag. "Time's up," the guard said more firmly. Owen stood slowly, still stunned, still processing. "Dad, I don't know what to believe anymore. Believe that I'm trying to save you." I pressed my hand against the glass. "And Owen, don't eat or drink anything Valerie brings you. Nothing. Do you understand?" He nodded numbly, and they led him away. I hung up the phone and turned toward the waiting area, my ribs protesting the movement. Valerie was gone. But on the chair where she'd been sitting, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A small pharmacy bag, white with the local drugstore's logo. The receipt was still attached, but I was too far away to read what she'd purchased. I moved toward it every step, sending pain shooting through my side. But before I reached the chair, a cleaning worker swept through and grabbed it, probably thinking someone had left trash behind. "Wait," I started to say, but she'd already dropped it in her rolling trash bin and moved on to the next area. I stood there in the empty waiting area, my prosecutor's instinct screaming warnings I couldn't yet articulate. Whatever Valerie had just purchased from that pharmacy, it wasn't for healing. It wasn't for comfort. It was for something else entirely. And I had a terrible feeling I was running out of time to figure out what. Saturday evening, 2 days after I left the hospital, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, still nursing broken ribs, exhausted from a week of revelations that had torn my world apart. But when I saw the name on the screen, curiosity won out. "Simon," Valerie's voice was honey-sweet. "I think we need to talk." Every instinct I'd honed over 30 years screamed danger. I said yes anyway. To clear the air, she continued, her tone perfectly calibrated to sound concerned, reasonable, like a daughter-in-law who genuinely cared. "To discuss Owen's situation like family should. A neutral location. Just you and me. No lawyers, no police, just two people who both love Owen." She suggested the Chesapeake Room, an upscale restaurant I'd been to once for a retirement dinner years ago. White tablecloths, dim lighting, the kind of place where conversations could stay private. Before I left, I called Malcolm. "You're insane," he said flatly. "She just tried to frame your son and probably tried to have you beaten to death in a parking garage, and you're going to have dinner with her." I need to hear what she says, need to understand her endgame. "Then I'm tracking your phone. And Simon, if anything feels wrong, you leave. Immediately. You understand?" I understand. By 7 o'clock, I was walking into the Chesapeake Room, my ribs protesting every step, despite the bandages wrapped tight under my shirt. Classical music played softly over hidden speakers. Candles flickered on tables set for intimate conversations. Valerie was already there, seated at a corner table with a view of the entrance. Designer dress hair, perfect, a welcoming smile that would have fooled anyone who didn't know what lay beneath. "Thank you for coming." She gestured to the seat across from her. "I know this has been difficult for everyone." I sat carefully, watching her face the way I used to watch suspects in interrogation rooms. "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding between us." She began, her voice carrying just the right mix of sincerity and sadness. "I know you think I'm driving a wedge between you and Owen, but I promise, Simon, I only want what's best for him. He needs his father. Especially now." She signaled the waiter. "The chef's special for both of us, please, and wine, the reserve selection." The waiter poured. I didn't touch mine. Appetizers arrived, something delicate with microgreens and truffle oil. Valerie ate hers slowly, watching me over the rim of her wine glass. "How are your ribs healing?" she asked, concern perfectly layered into her voice. "They're fine." I kept my tone neutral. "Random mugging, wrong place, wrong time." "Terrible," she murmured. But her eyes held something else. Something cold. The main course came next. Pan-seared salmon with an elaborate sauce that looked like artwork on the plate. The waiter set it down with the reverence reserved for expensive cuisine. "Just try it," Valerie urged, her smile brightening. I specifically requested the chef prepare this for you. I picked up my fork, cut a piece of the salmon, brought it toward my mouth, and paused. The smell hit me first, something underneath the butter and herbs. Chemical. Faint enough that most people would miss it, but I'd spent years as a prosecutor learning to notice details others overlooked. And the wine, its color, was slightly wrong. Darker than it should be. I put the fork in my mouth, chewed slowly. The taste confirmed what the smell had suggested, bitter underneath the sauce, wrong in a way that had nothing to do with seasoning. "How is it?" Valerie asked, watching me intently. "Excellent." I brought my napkin to my lips, discreetly spitting the food into the fabric while pretending to wipe my mouth. I pushed the plate away. "Actually, I'm not very hungry. Hospital food killed my appetite. You understand?" Something flickered in Valerie's eyes. Disappointment, calculation. Whatever it was disappeared quickly behind her practiced smile. "That's unfortunate. The chef took special care with yours." She emphasized the word yours just slightly. Just enough for me to hear the intent behind it. I stood up slowly, my ribs screaming protest. "I should go. Thank you for dinner, Valerie." I paused at the edge of the table. "Or should I call you Kendra?" The mask shattered. For one brief, horrible moment, I saw everything she'd been hiding for 7 years. Pure hatred. Cold, calculated rage. The face of someone who'd spent 15 years nursing a wound that had festered into something poisonous. Then she settled back in her chair. And when she spoke, her voice had lost all pretense of warmth. "So you know. I know about Douglas, about Dorothy, about 15 years of planning revenge against a man who never touched your father's case. You destroyed my father." Her voice stayed quiet. "We were in a public restaurant after all, but the venom was unmistakable. I never even met your father. I wasn't the prosecutor on his case. That was Bernard Lancaster. I was in a completely different division." Confusion flickered across her face, so brief I almost missed it. Then her expression hardened again. "Liar. Your face was everywhere. Every article, every broadcast. You were the one who—" "Check the court records," I said. "Public information. Bernard Lancaster prosecuted Douglas Grayson. Not me. You have the wrong man, Kendra. You've had the wrong man for 15 years. I started backing toward the exit, keeping my eyes on her. "We'll talk about this. With lawyers. With the court. But I'm done with your games." I turned and walked out, every nerve screaming at me to move faster, but my ribs wouldn't allow it. I made it to my car, hands shaking as I fumbled with the locks. The moment the doors closed, I called Malcolm. "Get police to that restaurant. Tell them to secure the food on table 7 and the wine. Don't let them clear anything." So what happened? "She tried to poison me." Malcolm arrived 20 minutes later with a contact from the police forensics lab. But Valerie was already gone. The restaurant manager said she'd paid in cash and left right after I did. The food also gone. The busboy had cleared the table with unusual speed, said a woman matching Valerie's description had given him $50 to do it quickly. Evidence vanished. Again. I was about to drive home when I saw it, a small piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. Folded once neat handwriting visible even in the parking lot lights. 5 words: "You should have stayed blind." The courtroom was packed on Tuesday morning, December 17th. I sat in the back row, deliberately out of sight, watching a judge decide my son's fate. Malcolm had warned me not to let Owen see me. "You're a trigger for him right now," he'd said. "Let the system work." So I stayed hidden while the system worked exactly as Valerie intended. Judge Stephen Caldwell presided over the hearing. I had stood before him dozens of times during my career. He was thorough, measured, and known for reading every brief. Today, he was the same man I remembered, calm, methodical, unhurried. Assistant District Attorney Samuel Wright presented the prosecution's argument with confidence. Your Honor, the defendant has access to offshore accounts embezzled approximately $850,000 and demonstrated sustained deceptive financial behavior. He represents a clear flight risk. Owen's public defender, Patrick Donnelly, looked young and overwhelmed, but determined. Your Honor, Mr. Brennan has no prior criminal record. He is a lifelong resident of this community. His wife is present and prepared to support him fully during these proceedings. I watched Owen at the defense table wearing an orange jumpsuit that seemed too large on his now thin frame. He'd lost more weight. The dark circles under his eyes were unmistakable. His hands rested on the table, shaking slightly. Judge Caldwell reviewed the file in silence. The courtroom waited. Bail is set at $500,000, he said at last. The defendant will surrender his passport and remain within Hartford County pending trial. $500,000. I had that amount barely tied up in retirement accounts and home equity. My hand moved toward my phone, already calculating transfers and collateral. Before I could act, Valerie stood. Your Honor, she said, her voice perfectly composed. I can arrange immediate payment. She produced a checkbook. I recognized the bank instantly. A joint account. Money she had stolen now being used to free the man she framed. Judge Caldwell nodded. The clerk will assist, just like that bail was posted. Owen was released into Valerie's custody. I was sidelined before I could intervene. Outside, the courthouse steps exploded into chaos. Cameras, microphones, shouting reporters. Valerie took control, immediately positioning herself slightly ahead of Owen. My husband is innocent, she said, voice steady but emotional. We trust the justice system and ask for privacy during this difficult time. Owen stood beside her, dazed, gripping her hand, as if it were the only solid thing left. She guided him through the crowd with ease. I caught up to them in the parking lot. Owen, wait. He turned, and the look on his face stopped me. Not confusion. Anger. What do you want, Dad? Please, I said quietly. Don't go home with her. You're not safe. You've done enough, he said, voice trembling with fury. You put me in jail. You called the police on your own son, and she's the one getting me out. That tells me who actually cares. She's been drugging you, I said desperately. The tea, the food. She's been keeping you confused so you wouldn't question. You're obsessed, Owen snapped. You can't stand that I chose someone you don't control, so you invent conspiracies to justify destroying my marriage. Security began moving closer. Leave me alone, he said, his voice breaking. Just leave me alone. He walked toward a black BMW I'd never seen before. New. Valerie waited by the passenger door, the image of loyalty. As Owen approached, she looked back at me. Her smile wasn't for the cameras. It was cold, precise, victorious. Then they drove away. I stood there, chest aching, feeling something I had never known in 30 years as a prosecutor: helplessness. That evening, a process server knocked on my door. The restraining order was clear and absolute. I was to remain 500 feet away from Owen Brennan, Valerie Brennan, and their residence. Violation meant arrest. One signature, one piece of paper, and every legal avenue I had was gone. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where Anne and I had planned our lives, where Owen had done homework as a child, and stared at the order. Valerie had trapped me. I couldn't warn him. I couldn't protect him. And whatever she planned next, I would have to watch it unfold from exactly 500 feet away. Malcolm's call came at 5 a.m. Wednesday morning. I woke to my phone buzzing on the nightstand, my ribs protesting as I rolled over to answer. I found him. Malcolm's voice was tight with urgency. Bernard Lancaster, retired in Naples, Florida. If we leave now, we can be there by 5:30 this evening. I was dressed and out the door in 10 minutes. Malcolm's 2018 Toyota was already running when I got in a thermos of coffee waiting in the cup holder. He'd done the research overnight. Bernard Lancaster, the prosecutor who'd actually convicted Douglas Grayson, had retired in 2015 and moved to a golf community in southwest Florida. 12 hours. Over 1,000 miles of highway between us and the one man who could prove I'd never touched the Grayson case. "What do I even say to him?" I asked, as we merged onto I-95 South Dawn, just breaking over Connecticut. "The truth," Malcolm said. "That a woman married your son to destroy you for a case you never prosecuted. That she's been planning this for 15 years. That we need his help to prove it. And if he won't help," Malcolm's hands tightened on the steering wheel, "then we figure out Plan B." We drove through morning traffic, stopping only for coffee and gas. Malcolm took the first 6 hours while I tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. All I could think about was Owen back in Connecticut, alone in that house with a woman who'd spent 7 years positioning herself to destroy him. The restraining order meant I couldn't even call him. Couldn't check if he was okay. 500 feet might as well have been 500 miles. We crossed into Georgia at 1 p.m., Florida at 3. The landscape changed from industrial corridor to palm trees and retirement communities, everything flat and green and utterly foreign to someone who'd spent his entire life in New England. Cypress Point was exactly what I'd imagined, a gated community with pristine golf courses, white buildings, retirees in golf carts, moving between clubhouse and condos. The security guard at the entrance looked skeptical when Malcolm explained we were former colleagues with a legal matter to discuss. "Mr. Lancaster doesn't usually take visitors without advance notice," the guard said. "Tell him Simon Brennan is here about the Douglas Grayson case," I said. "He'll understand." The guard made the call. Whatever Lancaster said convinced him because the gate swung open. We found him at the clubhouse sitting on a covered patio with a drink, sweating in the Florida heat. Bernard Lancaster, at 68, looked nothing like the prosecutor I vaguely remembered from newspaper photos, tanned fit, wearing a polo shirt and relaxed in a way that only comes from years of successful retirement. "Simon Brennan." He stood extending his hand. "I remember you. The Costello case, right? That was legendary. What brings you all the way to Florida?" I told him. Everything. Kendra Grayson. The 15-year revenge plot. Owen framed and jailed. The forged signatures. The media misidentification that had started it all. Lancaster's face went from confused to shocked to understanding as I talked. "Douglas Grayson." He sat back down heavily. "Christ, I haven't thought about that case in years. You're telling me his daughter thinks you prosecuted it?" "Every news article about the trial had my photo," I said. "I was famous that year for the Costello conviction. The media used my face for everything coming out of the DA's office." They do that," Lancaster said quietly. "You were photogenic, good with sound bites, made for television. They used your image even for cases you had nothing to do with." He paused. "And an 8-year-old girl saw your face everywhere and assumed you were the one who put her father in prison." "I need proof," I said. "Court records, trial transcripts, anything that shows I wasn't involved?" Lancaster nodded slowly. "Come inside. I keep digital copies of all my major cases." His condo was immaculate: white walls, golf trophies, photos of grandchildren. He pulled out an iPad and navigated to a cloud storage folder labeled Career Archive. The Grayson file was extensive. Trial transcripts, court filings, every document clearly listing Bernard Lancaster as lead prosecutor. My name didn't appear anywhere. Then he showed me the media coverage. Articles from 2010, television clips archived online, and there in every single piece was my face. Press conferences about the Costello case spliced into stories about the Grayson trial. My photo next to headlines about securities fraud I'd never investigated. "Hi, the media was sloppy," Lancaster said. "They wanted a face that sold papers. You were that face. I was just the guy doing the work." "Will you testify to that?" I asked. "If it comes to trial, will you provide a sworn statement?" "Absolutely." He was already pulling out a USB drive. "Let me copy these files for you. Court records, my personal notes, everything. This woman framed your son because of a mistake that wasn't even yours to begin with. We'll fix it." It was 6:30 p.m. Florida time when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I'd been screening calls all day, avoiding reporters and well-meaning former colleagues. But something made me pick up. Prosecutor's instinct, the kind that warns you when something is catastrophically wrong. I heard breathing first, heavy-labored wrong. Then Owen's voice, barely recognizable, slurred, weak, desperate. "Dad, help. Something's wrong. Can't." The phone clattered. Impact sounds. Something hitting the floor. Then Valerie's voice in the background, distant, but clear enough. "You weren't supposed to wake up yet." Sounds of struggle, a crash. The call cut off. I tried calling back immediately. The number was already disconnected. "Malcolm." My voice didn't sound like my own. "We need to go. Now." Malcolm was already moving, phone pressed to his ear, calling 911. I stood frozen on Lancaster's patio, my son's weak voice echoing in my mind, understanding with horrible clarity what I'd just heard. Valerie wasn't waiting anymore. Whatever her endgame was, it was happening right now. "How fast can we get back?" I asked, running after Malcolm to the car. He was already starting the engine. 12 hours if we drive straight through and break every speed limit. I looked at my watch. 6:30 p.m. Florida time. Owen was over 1,000 miles away, possibly dying. And I had 12 hours of highway between us. "Drive," I said. Malcolm's foot hit the gas, and Cypress Point disappeared behind us in a blur of palm trees and panic. Malcolm and I broke every speed limit between Naples and Connecticut. 12 straight hours on the highway, darkness swallowing the miles, headlights cutting tunnels through the night. We made frantic calls to the FBI and state police phones, switching between hands, charging cables stretched tight. No matter how fast Malcolm drove, one thought refused to leave me: we were already too late. The call to FBI Special Agent Nicole Bradford came at 3:45 p.m. somewhere between Naples and the Georgia state line. Malcolm had her number from his years handling federal security contracts. My phone was on speaker. The speedometer climbed past 90. "Special Agent Bradford. Agent Bradford. My name is Simon Brennan. I'm a retired Connecticut prosecutor. I need to report a federal case involving wire fraud and attempted murder." There was a pause. "Mr. Brennan, slow down and give me specifics." I couldn't slow down. My son Owen Brennan was framed for embezzling $850,000. The real perpetrator is his wife Valerie Brennan, real name Kendra Grayson. Her father Douglas Grayson was convicted of securities fraud in 2010. She's been planning this for 15 years. Right now, my son is dying in Connecticut while we're 1,000 miles away. Bradford's tone sharpened. "Where are you?" "Northbound I-95, just past the Florida-Georgia line." "Your son's location?" 482 Thornhill Drive, Greenwich, Connecticut. Typing echoed through the line. "I'm opening a case file. I need everything: documents, forensic reports, sworn statements. I'm sending you a secure email address." Malcolm took the next exit and pulled into a rest stop. For 20 minutes, we uploaded files from my phone, forged wire transfer photos, Dr. Eleanor Vaughn's handwriting analysis, Bernard Lancaster's sworn affidavit, and court records. Bradford stayed on the line the entire time. "Received," she said. "Connecticut State Police are being dispatched for a welfare check." "Tell them to hurry," I said. "If Kendra suspects, let us handle this." "Where will you be?" "Driving north," Malcolm said. "Connecticut by 4 a.m. I'll keep you updated. Don't act independently." The call ended. We were deep into South Carolina when Bradford called back. It was 4:30 p.m. Connecticut time. "Mr. Brennan, police conducted the welfare check. Your son was found unconscious. Paramedics are on scene. He's being transported to St. Francis Hospital. My hands went numb. Is he? He's alive. Suspected sedative overdose. He's being stabilized. And Valerie. No sign of her. The residence shows a rushed exit, drawers, open closets cleared. An APB is out for her vehicle, a black BMW 5 Series registered to Valerie Brennan. She's running, Malcolm said. Maryland State Police are assisting. Kendra Grayson's grandmother owned a farmhouse in Frederick County, vacant since 2013. Units are checking it now. That's where she'll go, I said. It's the last place that mattered to her. Stay available. The hours blurred. Virginia at 11 p.m., Maryland border at 2 a.m. Bradford called twice more. Owen was stable in ICU. The BMW was spotted on traffic cameras heading west toward Frederick County. A SWAT team was mobilizing. At 4:30 a.m., Malcolm's phone rang. Captain Porter, Maryland State Police. We located the vehicle, Porter said. Abandoned farmhouse 10 miles outside Frederick. No movement. Perimeter going up. Where are you? 20 minutes out, Malcolm replied. Do not approach. This is a police operation. Malcolm ended the call and pressed the accelerator. We arrived at 4:45 a.m. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road, fields choked with weeds, a barn collapsing beside it. Police cruisers ringed the property. Red and blue lights pulsed against the dawn. A SWAT van waited near the tree line. Agent Bradford stood at the perimeter, FBI jacket zipped tight. She raised a hand when she saw me. You stay back. That's my son's wife in there. This is federal. I'm the only one who knows why she's doing this, I said quietly. She thinks I destroyed her family. She's wrong. If anyone can reach her, it's me. Bradford studied me, then glanced toward the house. A single light burned upstairs. 5 minutes, she said. You don't enter without authorization. I walked toward the house, legs stiff, ribs aching from the beating weeks earlier. The porch boards creaked beneath my weight. Kendra, I called. I know you're inside. I know who you are. I know about Douglas. Silence. I stepped closer. I never prosecuted your father. That case belonged to Bernard Lancaster. I was assigned to a corporate fraud trial the same week. The media confused us. That's why my face appeared in coverage. Nothing. You've spent 15 years believing I destroyed your family, I said. It was a lie born from a journalist's mistake. I'm sorry for everything you lost. But my son didn't do this. He loved you. He still does. The door opened. Kendra stood in the doorway, backlit by dim light. Her hair was tangled, eyes red, face hollow. In her right hand, she held something small and dark. You're lying, she said. I'm not. Bernard Lancaster is in Florida. He has the records. I was never involved. Her hand shook. Your face was everywhere. Because of another case. Same week. Wrong man. My father died believing you ruined him. I know, I said. But hurting Owen won't fix that. For a moment, her expression wavered. Then it hardened. You should have stayed blind. Behind me, Bradford shouted, Kendra Grayson, FBI. Drop the object. Step outside. Kendra looked at me once more, then stepped back and slammed the door. Footsteps echoed upstairs. Bradford pulled me back. We're going in. I stood on frozen gravel as SWAT advanced, wondering if I'd just made everything worse. I climbed those stairs slowly, both hands raised, so she could see them, every creak of old wood echoing through the silent house. At the top, backlit by a single lamp from the room behind her, Kendra stood waiting. In her hands, not a weapon. A file folder. It was thick, worn at the edges, the kind of thing that had been carried for years. Newspaper clippings jutted out from the sides like paper thorns. Kendra, I said softly, we need to talk. So 15 years. Her voice was tired, hollow, not triumphant, just empty. I've been waiting for this moment for 15 years. I took another step up. The wood groaned under my weight. Do you know what it's like? She continued, to be 8 years old and watch your father's life destroyed on television. I can't imagine, I said honestly. In every night my grandmother showed me these. She lifted the folder slightly. Every single night. She'd sit with me at the kitchen table downstairs and we'd go through them together. She wanted me to remember, to never forget what was done to us. She opened the folder. Newspaper clippings, dozens of them, spilled out, slightly held together by aging rubber bands and paper clips. Look, she said, turning the folder toward me. Every clipping had my face on it. Prosecutor's office secures conviction in major fraud case. Simon Brennan's winning streak continues. DA's office celebrates another victory. Photos of me at podiums on courthouse steps at press conferences. Younger, confident, completely unaware. Your face, Kendra said. Everywhere. In every article about my father. Every news report. Every story about his trial and his conviction and his death. It was always you. I reached slowly into my coat pocket. Kendra tensed. I need to show you something, I said. Please. I pulled out the USB drive Bernard Lancaster had given me in Florida. May I? I gestured toward a laptop sitting open on a dusty desk near the window Kendra's still powered on. She hesitated, then nodded. I moved carefully, inserted the drive, and opened the files. Court transcripts filled the screen, page after page of official records from United States versus Douglas Grayson, case number 10. CR 4891. You read the prosecutor's name, I said quietly. The lead attorney. Kendra leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Bernard Lancaster, on every page. Motion to admit evidence. Bernard Lancaster, Assistant United States Attorney. Presentation of witness testimony. Bernard Lancaster. Closing arguments. Bernard Lancaster. Simon Brennan's name appeared nowhere in the official record. Kendra's hands began to shake. No. Grandmother showed me. Those were media photographs, I said. That year I was famous. I'd just won the Costello organized crime case, the biggest prosecution of my career. The media used my image to sell papers, even for cases I'd never touched. They needed a face for the tough prosecutor narrative. And I was convenient. You're lying. I was never assigned to your father's case. I was in a completely different division, white-collar crime, not securities fraud. I never met Douglas. I never spoke at his trial. I had nothing to do with his conviction. I clicked through more files, case assignment logs, prosecutor schedules, internal memos. Every document confirmed the same truth. Kendra stared at the screen. 15 years of certainty crumbling. I married Owen, her voice cracked. To hurt me, yes. I drugged him, controlled him, framed him for crimes he didn't commit. Yes, I destroyed an innocent man. Tears began streaming down her face. I destroyed my own husband, a man who loved me, who trusted me, who thought we were building a life together. Yes, I said again, more gently this time. Kendra slumped against the wall. For nothing. All of it. For nothing. The folder slipped from her hands. Newspaper clippings scattered across the floor like autumn leaves, my face staring up from dozens of photographs, frozen in moments I barely remembered. Your grandmother, I said carefully, was grieving. She lost her son. She needed someone to blame, and the media gave her a face. My face. But Kendra, what she gave you wasn't truth. It was poison disguised as love. She said we'd get justice. Kendra's voice was barely a whisper. She said if I was patient, if I was smart, if I planned carefully enough, we'd make you feel what we felt. And did it work? I asked. Do you feel better now? Does any of this feel like justice? She looked at me with eyes that had gone hollow. I feel nothing. Footsteps sounded on the stairs behind me. FBI agents moving up from their positions below. Agent Bradford appeared at the top landing, her weapon holstered, but her posture tense. "Ah, Mr. Brennan, step away from her." Two agents moved forward, producing handcuffs. Kendra didn't resist. She stood there like a marionette with cut strings while they secured her wrists behind her back. As they lifted her to her feet, she looked at me one more time. "And your name was everywhere," she said. "How was I supposed to know?" "I'm sorry about your father," I said. "I'm sorry the system failed your family. I'm sorry your grandmother fed you hatred instead of helping you heal. And I'm sorry that the media's laziness destroyed more lives than anyone counted." "Owen," she whispered, as the agents began guiding her toward the stairs. "Is he alive? At the hospital. You almost killed him, but he's alive." Something flickered in her eyes. Relief, regret, or maybe love, that had once been real beneath all the layers of revenge. "Will you tell him?" She stopped, shook her head. "No, there's nothing to tell him. Nothing that would matter now." The agents led her past me down the stairs, their footsteps heavy on the old wood. I heard the front door open, then close, car doors slamming, an engine starting. I stood alone in Dorothy Grayson's farmhouse as dawn broke through the dusty windows, painting everything in shades of gray. Around me scattered newspaper clippings, my own face staring up from dozens of photographs. The face of a man who'd never known he was destroying a little girl's life just by getting his picture taken. Outside, I heard car doors close, engines rev. Kendra was being driven away in federal custody to Hartford, to arraignment, to trial, to prison. The revenge plot that had consumed 15 years of her life was over, and I felt nothing but a bone-deep sadness for Owen, for Kendra, for Douglas, for all the lives that hatred had shattered. 15 years of planning, 7 years of marriage, one careless moment by a photo editor who needed a recognizable face for the morning edition, and countless lives ruined because no one thought to check the truth. I bent down and picked up one of the clippings, a photo of me from 2010, standing on the courthouse steps, with my briefcase looking confident and righteous. I didn't even remember that day. It had been just another case, just another press conference, just another moment in a career full of them. But for an 8-year-old girl watching her father's world collapse, it had been everything. I heard Agent Bradford's footsteps on the stairs. "Mr. Brennan, we need to take your statement. And then I imagine you'll want to get to Connecticut to see your son." "Yes," I said, letting the clipping fall back to the floor. "Let's go home." 6 months after that December night in Maryland, after the arrests, the headlines, and countless hours spent beside Owen's hospital bed, I sat in a federal courtroom and watched a judge sentence Kendra Grayson to 25 years in prison. But that wasn't where this story truly ended. It ended on a quiet Sunday morning, standing beside my son at his mother's grave, finally at peace. But first, the trial, June 2026. Federal Court, Hartford. The courtroom was full, journalists, legal observers, and members of the public who had followed the case for months. This time, I wasn't a prosecutor. I was just a father watching justice take its course. Kendra sat at the defense table in a gray suit, hands folded, expression empty. The woman who had executed a 7-year revenge plot looked small now, nothing like the confident hostess who had welcomed me into her home. The charges were read: wire fraud, identity fraud, attempted murder, conspiracy. Each a federal offense, each carrying years behind bars. I testified. So did Malcolm. Dr. Eleanor Vaughn explained the forged signatures. Bernard Lancaster appeared via video from Florida, confirming I had never prosecuted Douglas Grayson. FBI forensic accountants traced the stolen money through shell companies and offshore accounts. Owen's medical records showed dangerous sedative levels, evidence of long-term poisoning. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing, Judge Margaret Collins looked directly at Kendra. "Ms. Grayson, you destroyed innocent lives based on a mistake you never verified. Revenge without truth is cruelty. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison with restitution of $850,000. Kendra showed no reaction. Whatever fire had fueled her for 15 years had burned out. Owen's recovery was slow. January hospital detox. His body struggled after years of sedatives hidden in tea and vitamins. Memory gaps. Weakness. February physical and cognitive therapy. Gradually, the son I remembered returned clearer but scarred. March, he moved into an apartment near my house. Weekly dinners began awkward at first, then easier. April, the divorce was finalized, uncontested, signed from federal custody. May, Owen returned to work part-time, healthier, stronger, himself again. The day after sentencing, Owen called. Dad, want to get coffee. We met at Roosevelt's cafe. Sunlight filled the room. Owen looked present, alive. The doctors say the effects should fade completely, he said. Some memory gaps may remain, but most of it's coming back. You're here, I said. That's what matters. After a pause, Owen spoke. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. She kept me so confused. You were manipulated and drugged. That wasn't your fault. He nodded. Do you ever think about visiting her? I already did. He looked surprised. The prison visiting room was divided by plexiglass. Kendra sat in an orange jumpsuit, older hollow. Why did you come? She asked. To say I'm sorry about your father and your grandmother. The system failed your family. You didn't prosecute him. No. But I'm still sorry for the child who grew up in grief instead of love. She was silent. Owen will never forgive me, she said. He doesn't have to. Then why forgive me? Because hatred destroys everything it touches. I won't carry it anymore. As I stood to leave, she pressed her hand to the glass. Thank you for saving Owen. Back at the cafe, Owen listened quietly. I don't know if I can forgive her, he said. You don't have to. Healing takes different paths. He smiled faintly. Mom would know what to say. She always did. Final scene, Sunday morning, September 2026. Owen and I drove to Riverside Cemetery together for the first time since Anne's funeral. We stood before her headstone. Anne Marie Brennan, 1960 to 2019. Beloved wife and mother. Mom would say we survived, Owen said. That we're still family. Still family, I repeated. His hand rested on my shoulder. No fear, no flinch. Next Sunday, he asked. Coffee? I'd like that. Driving home in warm sunlight. I reflected on everything I'd learned about truth, about hatred, passed down, about forgiveness, earned slowly, about how love, imperfect but real, is stronger than revenge. Some things just take time, and some things are worth waiting for. And to you listening to this story, remember this. I spent 30 years as a prosecutor, believing that truth and justice were always clear-cut. But this family story taught me that sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we never think to question. God has a way of revealing truth in the darkest moments, even when we've lost all hope. Standing in that Maryland farmhouse at dawn, watching 15 years of hatred crumble under the weight of documented evidence, I understood that divine timing isn't always comfortable, but it's always purposeful. Prayer kept me grounded when my son's life hung in the balance, and faith gave me the strength to forgive the unforgivable. If I could go back, here's what I'd tell my younger self. Don't let pride keep you from asking hard questions. Don't assume that, because someone loves you, they can't deceive you. And never ever let 6 months of silence with your child go unexamined. That dad revenge story Kendra orchestrated against me, it only worked because I wasn't paying attention. Because I thought being right mattered more than being present. This family story isn't just mine, it's a warning. To parents, stay connected to your children even when it's uncomfortable. To sons and daughters, communicate before resentment builds walls. To anyone seeking dad revenge or any revenge at all, remember that Kendra spent 15 years destroying innocent lives, and it brought her nothing but a prison cell and a lifetime of regret. In my personal opinion, the real villain of this family story wasn't Kendra. It was unchecked grief lazy journalism, and our collective failure to verify truth before passing judgment. We live in an age where anyone can be destroyed by a photograph taken out of context. That terrifies me. So please, if this story moved, you leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Have you ever been caught in a web of misunderstanding? How did you find your way back to truth? Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. And a quick note, the stories that follow may contain fictional elements created for educational purposes. If this type of content isn't for you, feel free to explore other videos that better suit your preferences.